Picture two men, same age, same neighborhood. Both got laid off from the same factory in the same month, 3 years ago. Same severance check. Same bad news on the same Tuesday. Same drive home afterward, radio off, neither of them saying much. Because what is there to say when the thing you built your life around just told you it doesn't need you anymore? Today, one of them is still telling the story of how the economy screwed him. He tells it well. He's told it so many times it comes out smooth now, no rough edges, like a stone that's been in a river a long time. The other one owns 2 food trucks and just hired his old supervisor. Nothing external explains the gap. Not luck, not talent, not who they knew. They walked out of that factory with the same skills, the same connections, the same amount of money in the bank. The only thing that was ever different between them was what happened in the 6 inches between their ears. And by the end of the next few minutes, you're going to know exactly what that difference is and exactly how to put it to work before you go to bed tonight. Here's the truth nobody wants to hear. Your life is not shaped by your circumstances. It's shaped by how you think about your circumstances. That's not a bumper sticker. That's the whole mechanism. 2 people can lose the same job, live on the same street, start with the same amount of money folded in their wallet. And 5 years later, one is thriving and the other is still explaining why he isn't. The difference was never the situation. The difference was the mind that walked into the situation. Same weather, 2 different ships. One took on water, the other adjusted its sail and kept moving. So let's break that shift into pieces you can actually hold. Because a big idea is worthless until you can use it before the sun goes down today. Stop blaming the winter. There will always be a winter, a recession, a slow season, a boss who doesn't see your value, a market that isn't cooperating. And here's what most people do when winter comes. They fold their arms and wait for spring to rescue them. I'll get serious when things get easier. Or things don't get easier. They get different. There's always another storm waiting on the other side of this one, wearing a new name. You survive the layoff and then it's the rent increase. You survive the rent increase and then it's the health scare. You survive the health scare and then it's something you haven't even met yet. Winter doesn't run out. It just keeps changing its coat. The wind doesn't ask permission before it blows, and it blows on the rich and the poor, the disciplined and the lazy, without favoritism and without explanation. Nobody gets a calm life because they deserve one. What separates people isn't the weather they were handed. It's what they did while the storm was happening. One of our 2 men spent his layoff refreshing job boards and telling anyone who'd listen that the economy was rigged. He wasn't wrong about the economy being hard. He just made the mistake of stopping there. Like naming the storm was the same thing as surviving it. The other spent his layoff in his truck at 5 a.m., testing recipes on a propane stove in his driveway. 3 months before, he had a single customer before he even had a name for the business. Same storm, 2 completely different postures inside it. One man stood still and let the wind describe him. The other kept building while it howled. So don't ask life to make it easier. Ask yourself to become more capable. The winter isn't your enemy. It's your training ground. Nobody you admire built something lasting during a season that was convenient. Every person whose life you envy has a version of that driveway, that propane stove, that cold morning nobody saw. They learned to adjust their sail. That's the whole lesson. Change your language before you change your life. The words you say to yourself in private become the walls around your own future. And you lay those bricks without ever noticing you're building anything. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to construct a prison out of sentences. It happens one offhand comment at a time, over years, until the walls are so familiar you mistake them for the shape of the world instead of the shape of your own thinking. I'm just not good with money. I've never been the disciplined type. That's just not who I am. Each sentence feels harmless, an offhand comment, nothing more. But say it enough times and your mind stops treating it as an opinion. It starts treating it as an instruction. It stops asking whether the sentence is true and starts asking how to make sure it stays true, because that's what minds do with anything repeated often enough. They protect it, defend it, arrange the evidence around it. Your subconscious doesn't fact check you. It believes the most repeated voice it hears, and 9 times out of 10, that voice is yours. Spend years narrating your own excuses, and don't be surprised when your life quietly organizes itself around exactly what you kept saying. You weren't dealt a bad hand. You talked yourself into a small one sentence at a time, the same way water carves a canyon. Not with one dramatic strike, but with the same small groove, cut 1,000 times until it's the only path left. Now flip it. Not, I'm not good with money. Try, I'm learning to manage money better every month. Not, I've never been disciplined. Try, I'm building discipline one day at a time. You're not lying to yourself. You're not demanding instant perfection. You're describing a direction instead of a sentence. And that shift alone opens a door your old words had nailed shut years ago. Successful people sound different long before they live different. Listen to how they talk about setbacks, about money, about themselves. The language moves first. The life follows it the way a shadow follows a body. You never see a shadow lead. It always trails behind the thing that's actually moving. Change what's moving, and the shadow has no choice but to follow. Choose discipline over motivation. Almost everyone gets this backward. They think they need more motivation, so they chase inspiration like it's the missing ingredient. Another video, another quote, another 5 a.m. Success story, waiting for the rush of excitement before they finally act. And it works for a day, maybe a week, but motivation is a spark, not a fire. It burns out fast, usually right when the work turns hard and repetitive, which is exactly the moment most people quit, right on the edge of the breakthrough they never got to see. Because the breakthrough is almost always hiding directly behind the boring part. Discipline doesn't ask how you feel this morning. It doesn't need a pep talk or a sunrise or a countdown video. It just shows up on the good days and the forgettable ones, on the days you feel like a main character and the days you feel like nothing at all. Anybody can put in effort when they're inspired. That's easy. That's the cheapest version of effort there is. What separates people is what they do on the days they don't feel like doing anything at all. Motivation gets you to start the diet. Discipline gets you through the birthday cake on the counter 3 weeks later when nobody's watching, when one slice genuinely wouldn't matter, and you do it anyway because you told yourself you would. Motivation signs you up for the gym. Discipline gets you there on the cold, rainy morning when nobody would know if you skipped it, when the version of you that stays in bed has 100 reasonable excuses, and the version of you that gets up has exactly one reason. You said you would. Goals set the direction. Discipline builds the road, brick by unremarkable brick, in weather nobody photographs. Stop waiting to feel ready. Build the discipline to act without the feeling, and you'll discover something strange. The results show up long before the motivation ever does. In fact, most people have the order backwards their entire lives. They think motivation produces action. It's the reverse. Action, repeated without needing to feel like it, is what eventually produces something that looks a lot like motivation. Except now it's earned. And it doesn't evaporate the first time things get hard. Invest in yourself in the hours nobody's watching. Most people spend 8 hours a day working to make a living. Necessary. Nobody's arguing that. But here's the question that separates people over the long run. What are you doing with the hours after that? On your commute? On your lunch break? In the quiet 20 minutes before bed when the phone is calling for your attention, offering you something easy in exchange for something that actually matters? Are you feeding your mind or letting it sit idle, absorbing whatever's easiest? Nobody applauded our food truck owner for the 11 months he spent learning food safety permits, supplier contracts, and margins on a napkin at his kitchen table. There was no audience for that. No highlight reel, no video of him hunched over a calculator at midnight figuring out whether he could afford a used fryer. Just a man and a napkin and the kind of boring, unglamorous hour that never makes it into anyone's highlight reel, and yet is the only hour that ever built anything real. He didn't know yet whether any of it would work. He built it anyway, in the dark, on the chance that it would. Those small, unpaid hours, the ones that never show up on any paycheck, are exactly where a different future gets built. Quietly. One evening at a time. Nobody hands out trophies for the version of you that reads instead of scrolls, that studies instead of complains, that shows up to the unglamorous hour while everyone else is asleep or distracted. The reward for those hours doesn't arrive on a schedule you can see. It arrives late, all at once, and looks to everyone else like luck. Read the books that stretch you, not just the ones that confirm what you already believe. Listen to people who've already walked the road you're trying to walk, and pay closer attention to how they talk about the hard parts than the easy ones. Study your own mistakes instead of burying them, because a mistake you refuse to look at will happen again, exactly the same way, wearing a different outfit. None of it is complicated, and none of it requires permission. Once you stop outsourcing your growth, you stop being at the mercy of other people's priorities for your own life. You become the one steering. And that shift, small and unglamorous, is where every real transformation quietly begins, far from the applause. Watch who you're becoming an average of. Whether you notice it or not, you are slowly becoming an average of the 5 people closest to you, not because you're weak-minded, because that's simply how human beings are built. We absorb the standards and habits of the people we're closest to the same way a room takes on the temperature around it, without a word being spoken, without anyone announcing that anything is happening at all. If the people around you are comfortable complaining, you will get comfortable complaining too, because everyone around you agrees with you and validates the very thing keeping you stuck. It feels like connection. It feels like being understood. It is in its own way. But it's connection built around a shared ceiling, and every time the group affirms the complaint, the ceiling gets a little more permanent. It's not that they're bad people. It's that their ceiling becomes your ceiling if you stand under it long enough, and nobody in that room is going to be the one to tell you to leave, because your staying is part of what makes their own ceiling feel normal. Here's the detail people miss about our 2 men. The one who's still stuck didn't fail alone. He surrounded himself with 3 other guys from the factory floor, and every single one of them is still telling the same story about the layoff. 3 years later, word for word, at the same bar, on the same nights. They've perfected it together. Misery doesn't just love company. It recruits it, drills it, and keeps it on retainer, because a shared story is easier to believe than a lonely one. And none of them wants to be the first to admit the story might not be true anymore. Now flip that. Surround yourself with people who are building, reading, growing, people who talk about what's possible instead of what's wrong, who ask what would it take instead of why bother, and you'll catch that energy the same way you'd catch anything else contagious. Their standards become your standards without you even trying, the same way their complaints would have if you'd chosen differently. So take an honest look at your circle, not to judge anyone. Most people in a stuck circle aren't bad people, they're just comfortable, and comfort is quiet. And quiet is contagious. Just ask, if I become exactly like the 5 people I spend the most time with, am I happy with that outcome? If that question makes you uncomfortable, that discomfort is information. It might be the most important adjustment you make all year. And it might also be the hardest, because it rarely means dramatic goodbyes. Usually it just means being a little more intentional about whose voice gets the most airtime in your week. Start before you're ready. If you wait for confidence to show up first, you'll wait for the rest of your life. Most people have this backward. They believe confidence comes first and action follows. That someday they'll wake up feeling brave enough, prepared enough, certain enough. That day doesn't come. It's not scheduled. It's not coming. Confidence isn't something you find sitting quietly by yourself, waiting for it like a package on your doorstep. Confidence is manufactured, and it's only manufactured through action. Our food truck owner didn't feel ready either. He didn't have the permits finished, the branding decided, or even a name for the truck when he put the deposit down. He was terrified the entire first week. He remembers standing at the window, taking his first order, hands shaking, positive he was about to embarrass himself in front of a stranger over something as simple as a sandwich. He was still terrified the day he hired his old supervisor, a different kind of terrified, the kind that comes with more to lose, not less. He just stopped waiting for the fear to leave the room before he'd let himself start. He let it ride along instead. Think about the first time you did anything that mattered. Drove a car, spoke in front of a room, asked for a raise, told someone how you really felt about them. Were you confident before you did it? Almost never. You were nervous, unsure, maybe a little sick to your stomach, running through every way it could go wrong. But you did it anyway, and something happened on the other side that couldn't have happened any other way. That's where confidence actually comes from. Not from feeling ready, from evidence. And evidence only comes from doing. This is why so many good ideas die quietly in people's heads. Unshared, unstarted, unlived. They're waiting for a feeling that action was always meant to produce, not precede. When I feel ready, I'll start. Readiness is a myth dressed up as wisdom, a respectable sounding way to stay still. Nobody feels fully ready. Not the people you admire, not the people who built the things that impress you, not the man who put a deposit down on a truck with no name. They move before the fear left and let the fear catch up and fade behind them somewhere down the road, usually further behind than they expected. So stop auditioning for your own life. Take the step while your hands are still shaking. Send the message before you've rehearsed it perfectly. Make the call before you found the perfect words. That first uncomfortable step is the only thing that has ever actually built confidence in anyone ever. Not the 100th step, not the practiced one. The first one. The shaky one. That's the one that counts. So there it is. Not a checklist. One truth wearing 6 different faces. Stop blaming the winter, because the storm was never your enemy. It was your training ground. Watch your language, because the words you whisper in private become the walls or the doors of your future. Choose discipline over motivation, because motivation is a spark, but discipline is the fire that actually gets you somewhere when the spark burns out, which it always does. Take responsibility for your own growth in the hours nobody's watching, because nobody is coming to hand you a better life on a schedule that's convenient for you. Choose your circle carefully, because you will rise no higher than the people standing closest to you, no matter how hard you try. And start before you're ready, because confidence was never the price of admission. It was always the reward waiting on the other side of action. Remember those 2 men from the factory, same layoff, same Tuesday, same empty calendar the next morning, staring back at both of them like a question neither had asked for. One of them filled that calendar with reasons, good reasons, honest reasons, reasons a jury would have accepted. The other filled it with a napkin full of numbers, a propane stove in a cold driveway, and a name for a truck he hadn't built yet and wasn't sure would work. That's the entire gap between 2 lives. Not talent, not luck, not a better hand of cards. And it starts closing the moment you decide to close it. None of this requires you to be smarter, luckier, or born into better circumstances than anyone else. It only requires you to think differently, starting today, in this ordinary moment that feels like nothing special. Because every extraordinary life was, at some point, sitting inside a moment that felt exactly like this one. Transformation doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly on an unremarkable Tuesday, the moment you decide to see your life differently than you saw it yesterday. You don't need a new set of circumstances. You don't need permission, and you don't need perfect timing. Perfect timing is just another word for later, and later has a way of never actually arriving. You need a new mind, because the mind that got you here will not be the mind that gets you there. Change how you think, and everything you've been chasing will start chasing you instead. Don't wait for life to change before you change your mind. Change your mind, and watch everything else follow.